Welcome to episode 18 of Quiltside Chats, brought to you by American Quilt Study Group. The American Quilt Study Group establishes and promotes the highest standards for interdisciplinary quilt-related studies, providing opportunities for study, research, and the publication of works that advance the knowledge of quilts and related subjects. In partnership with the International Quilt Museum at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. The International Quilt Museum's mission is to build a global collection and audience that celebrate the cultural and artistic significance of quilts. Quiltside Chats are a series of lively conversations between Carolyn Ducey, International Quilt Museum Curator of Collections, and an American Quilt Study Group member featuring the quilt that she or he would sneak out of the building if it weren't a crime. Nancy Bavor holds a bachelor's degree in art history from Northwestern University and a master's degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the history of textiles with a quilt studies emphasis. Her master's thesis explores the origins and development of the art quilt in California. She joined the staff of the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles in 2013, serving as Curator of Collections and Exhibits Coordinator, and as Director from 2017 to 2021. In 2018, she co-authored the book Art Quilts Unfolding, 50 Years of Innovation. Bavor has served on the boards of Studio Art Quilt Associates and the Quilt Alliance, and is currently a board member of the International Advisory Board of the International Quilt Museum and board president of the American Quilt Study Group. She has been an American Quilters Society certified appraiser since 2011. Dr. Carolyn Ducey is Curator of Collections at the International Quilt Museum, a position she has held since 1998. She oversees acquisition and management of the IQM collection of more than 8,500 quilts. Ducey earned an MA in American Art History from Indiana University in 1998 and her PhD in Textiles, Clothing, and Design with an emphasis in quilt studies at the University of Nebraska in 2010. She is co-editor of American Quilts in the Industrial Age, 1760 to 1870, and co-author of What's in a Name? Inscribed Quilts. And now, let's cozy up to the quilt.
Nancy.
Good morning, Carolyn. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to be here today. Thank you for being here.
I'm excited to chat with you today, too. I love this topic that you've selected. I'm such a big fan of Nancy Crow's, and I find her kind of a fascinating artist in person. So I think I'm really going to learn a lot today. And it was interesting to me that you chose the topic because I know you do specialize in kind of the California movement. And then now we're going to really look at the Ohio movement. And just those two things in themselves are so fascinating. So this is going to be really fun.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'm going to learn something today, too, because I know you've spent a lot of time with Nancy. So yes, this is the quilt that I would like to sneak out of the IQM if it weren't a crime. And when we look at it with today's eye, it doesn't seem maybe so radical now, but keep in mind, this is 1980, almost 45 years ago. And not only is it just at the forefront of innovative design for the time, I mean, it's just really a bold composition, fascinating use of color, use of stripes, solids, straight lines, even curves. There's just a lot going on in this quilt. And I think that's why it appealed to me, is I keep coming back, and every time I look at it, I see something different. It's just fabulous.
You know, that's always for me a really good sign of a great quilt, is that you just want to keep looking.
Exactly. I'm going to go to the next slide, which is a detail, because what's interesting is, although this is really an innovative overall design, there are these references to traditional quilts. It's really a quadrilateral design. It's 4 equal parts, and there are lots of 19th century quilts, applique especially, that have 4 large blocks. They might be surrounded by a board or something else. So that kind of refers to that. And that center section with the black to gray to turquoise, a lot of the sections are reminiscent of maybe a log cabin design. So even though it's really, innovative for the time, it still refers to some traditional quilt designs. And again, I find that fascinating as well.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next design, the next quilt. So this was also a contender.
I am in love with this quilt, and I always will be. It is, when you see it in the flesh, and we had it up in 2008. I couldn't even stand it. It was so stunningly beautiful.
Yeah, I think we're going to see it. We have an exhibition slide later. I think that's in it, but I'm not sure. But what I also, as I was doing some research for this talk, again, a reference to log cabins. And I think, well, no, I made a design. If you squint and look at it, if you squint, don't squint, people. If you look at it through your cell phone in a small, really little design, it almost looks like it's curved, the way she's done the gradation of colors. And again, as I was doing research in this, she said, keep in mind, this is not stripped piece. Each of these are cut individually and stitched individually. So this is not strip piecing on her part. And also keep in mind, this is 1976. This is even earlier than the first quilt we saw. Again, innovative, and using store-bought fabrics. These are not dyed gradations that we're so used to now, but these are what she was able to purchase. So.
This is the quote when you hear people say something is timeless. Mm-hmm. That is what always comes to mind when I see this, because this design is just so, you could say it was made last week.
Yeah,
and it would be perfectly appropriate for that.
It would still bring me back if I saw it in an exhibition or something. It would still bring me back to look at it. What's going on and how did she achieve this effect? And I'm just going to show one more slide. This was also a contender. I don't know where it is. But again, just to show, she very quickly developed her own style. She kind of started making quilts about 1976, but by 79, she really had honed her own style and just was amazing at it. So that's, I said, as I don't know where this is, it's not in a museum. And so the second reason I chose to steal this one, take it out of the museum, is because there aren't many of her works in public collections. And she's had a long career as an artist and a teacher, author, as curator, still making work. But after 5 decades of work, she really has sold relatively few quilts. So there were very few in public institutions that I could steal. So, but this one would be on my larceny list. And again, that focus on quadrilateral geometry, but the play of light and dark, and where's the foreground, what's the background. Again, I just keep coming back to this and look at that. But remember the complexity of these earlier ones as we look at some of her later. I know you will know, but our viewers, I'm reminding our viewers to remember some of these complexities. So,
yes.
And then the next reason is Nancy Crow played a significant role in the art quilt movement and continues to play a major role in its development and nurturing, and I have to say training, some of today's artists. And for more information about the Ohio art quilt movement, I recommend Gail Pritchard's excellent book. She was actually quite helpful to me when I was working on my thesis about the California pioneers and just how some of her working methods and questions. But Nancy's role in the art quilt movement internationally may also have a lot to do with geography, because she was born and raised and still lives in Ohio. And Ohio, along with California and New England, was really one of the epicenters of the art quilt movement. And, like her counterparts on the East Coast and the West Coast, she was influenced by the same national, social, and political economic changes in the US in the 60s. But there was a long quilt making tradition in Ohio that also, I think, played a role. Just a reminder for viewers, just kind of the view from 10,000 feet. In the 19th and early 20th century, artists, art was painting, sculpture, and it wasn't really until the 60s and 70s that artists started looking at other media, quilts, video photography was not really considered a fine art until by the mainstream, I would say, until later. And also working in craft media. And Nancy was a university trained artist, so she would have been aware of this mainstream shift in the 20th century. And Ohio was a land grant state, which meant that universities and colleges had lots of financial support. And so there were colleges and universities throughout the state that Nancy attended. And eventually she did get her MFA in 1969 from Ohio State. So that was going on at university and in the art world. But also this early 70s were a time when quilts came to national attention. And a lot of people know about the Whitney show at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, where quilts were displayed in an art museum as art. And this show traveled for years. It got huge publicity. And I'm sure that Nancy was aware of that. And also the bicentennial, kind of the counterculture where the embracing of the handmade rather than manufactured. And then I think feminism played a role in embracing quilts, which were women's work. And
definitely.
So all of these, I think, were national, but also very much so in Ohio. And
it was such an interesting period, Nancy, because all of this stuff kind of just came together. All of those elements you're talking about, but things really exploded in the 60s and 70s. And around like that abstract design show, we when we showed that, we have those quilts at the museum. Sandra Sider did an amazing research project on the art scene in New York, the textile art scene, and the number of exhibitions that were held at that time that were textile or fiber related was really kind of incredible. It was really kind of an amazing, I didn't realize what a huge kind of jump it was just in the sheer numbers of what was being done.
And I kind of think we're in a little bit of that period now, in kind of, I don't want to say a renaissance, but a second explosion where, you know, art students are not saying, oh, I'm a textile artist or a fiber artist. I'm an artist. And today, to express myself, I'm going to work in textile media. And I think we're in, and every time you look around, exhibition I go to, there is some textile element in it. And I think that was very similar to what was going on in the 70s, where ceramics, carving, glass, textiles, quilts, painting were all exhibited together. And it wasn't this separation of media. So no, I find it's very exciting. But then Ohio too, unlike California, had this tradition of quilt making from, you know, it was a period when nationwide quilt making was kind of on the decline, but Ohio managed, the rural Ohio managed to keep quilt making traditions alive, especially with the Amish and Mennonite communities that were there. And again, in learning more about Nancy, she learned to quilt from a senior center. So, you know, it's not something she learned from her grandmother or her mother, but because these traditions were very much alive in Ohio, you know, that's how she learned to quilt. So I do recommend Gail's book, which is full of really wonderful information. So, and also I found that when she was in college, and just for really 10 years after, she was a weaver. And I think you can see some of those references to weaving and some of that early work that is so complex with light, dark, and you kind of, I mean, if we could go back maybe to one slide, just go back one slide if we can. I mean, you could imagine, I mean, it's a pretty complex weaving, but
I never thought about that before, but it really does have that kind of feeling of a structured piece like that. Yeah.
And a couple of other California artists I interviewed started as weavers and turned to quilt making, and they said, you know, I just had too many ideas in my head. I couldn't translate them quickly enough on the loom. And plus a loom takes up a lot of space. Whereas, you know, you can have maybe some smaller components that you can work on. So I thought that was very interesting that a lot of the quilt artists did work in other media, ceramics, glass, weaving, before they embraced quilt making. So, She also kind of discovered quilts, as I mentioned, the Whitney show in 71 and the bicentennial, but she didn't really kind of think of them as a means of expression until about 1976. And it was not, so she made a few quilts, obviously 79, but it was in 1979 that she said, okay, putting away my loom, I'm going to embrace the quilt, as my art media of expression. And I think, again, that was not too unlike some others. So let's go 2 slides forward. So for most of the 80s and some of the 90s, she continued evolving that very precise piecing style. But according to her, by 1990, she was just ready to abandon quilt making altogether because she was just tired of the process of making templates to make those symmetrical designs just too tedious. Though she had seen the work of Anna Williams, an African-American quilt maker, it wasn't until she invited Anna to exhibit a group of her quilts in Columbus at the Art Quilt Surface Design Symposium in Columbus, Ohio. And as I said, this quilt is in Nancy's collection. But what she was so impressed with is that Anna had a full-time job, was caring for family, but in just a few years had made this incredible body of work that just flowed out of her. And it's really the opposite of what Nancy had been doing. And so she thought, okay, I really need to change my way of thinking. And as she said, it's a quote, I'm going to read it. She said, with nearly 15 years of straight edges to fight off, I knew I had to find a way to freedom. And she had what she calls a period of fits, starts, and doubts. And, while others were working improvisationally, she was really a pioneer and a leader in spreading the awareness and the possibilities with putting away your rulers. By then, everybody pretty much was using the rotary cutter. And it was really easy to get a whole bunch of straight lines. It's hard to get a not straight line if you're used to cutting only straight lines. So as she said, I have to find a way to freedom. So I think that's fascinating. And she also began dyeing her own fabric. Again, there were other artists who were dyeing their own fabric, but I think not as early as Nancy. And she did it with abandon, dyeing hundreds of yards at a time. And I remember a description of her in her driveway with these yards and yards and yards of, dyeing 10 yards at a time. But she couldn't get these deep, saturated hues that she really wanted to work with, and the super saturated solids that she just couldn't find to buy. And I think just going forward from here on, that's a really important part of her process.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Next quilt. This is one of her early. She had a series of constructions. She had over 90 pieces, so this is early in that series. But again, these are some of these deep, saturated hues, and working to be more casual, not to have everything lined up. And she was
interesting knowing her later work. It's so fascinating to see how she's trying so hard to break out of the grid. So but she's still got, even you can still see it here. Yeah. It's a really interesting mid piece.
No, it is. It's you can understand. I'm a quilt maker, so I can understand when I have to do something that's wonky or points don't match or something. It's like it's really hard for me to just put away my ruler and trust my instinct. It's just, as she said.
I think it's harder than anyone realizes when you're trying to do it deliberately. You can do it pretty easily, maybe when you're not thinking about it, but when you try, it's like you have to make a very different decision than following your ruler.
Yeah. And I think with her very precise symmetrical piecing, once she worked out one of the one of the quadrants, it was repetition. She worked it out all together, and there's a great picture of her design board where she's, auditioning pieces and that sort of thing. But once you get it, it's 4 of the same, and there are no 2 blocks in this that are the same, which again, I think is part of the process. And so then later on in the decade, she was incredibly productive during the 90s and the 2000s and created an enormous body of work. And the next one is Constructions, number 45, I think, which
Wow.
she's getting there. So this is 2001, whereas the other one was 1997. And I think I first became aware of her work in the 90s, but it was this work, the later pieces in the constructions that really just, it's like her earlier work. What's going on here? You know, what goes with what? You know, quadrilateral sort of, but not identical. And yeah.
Yeah, it is a pretty intriguing thing to see her work in chronological order like that and see the steps she's made through lots and lots of trial and error, because she is so prolific, and she works in these series and keeps attacking, what is it, maybe just some problem or issue in her head that she's trying. I'm not even sure. I think that's why she's an artist and I'm not. She has something in her head that she is trying to solve, maybe, or I don't know, maybe she just works until she's ready for something different. But I feel like there's always that continuity of exploration through her quilts.
I think that working in series, from the artists I've talked to, I'm not an artist, that working in series, like you set up a problem. Okay, what happens if you have light dark, or what happens if you have complementary colors, or what if you do only neutrals, and you just set up these challenges, and then you add maybe another challenge, or another layer to that challenge, no pun intended, but you know, you just keep, and they're infinite number really, and you learn from each one, and some work and some don't, or you figure out how to make it work. And I think that's what artists do, a lot of artists. And then the next one is number 82, which is interesting because it's just a few years later, and although it's now more precise piecing, there still is an improvisation. I mean, to me, this reminds me of pickup sticks that you just throw out, and that's how they land. And
yes,
clearly not. Clearly.
I love too that Nancy's named this breaking control, and I'll tell you, that was one of the most interesting things in getting to know Nancy. Was she talked about how much anxiety she has when she's working on pieces and she can't quite solve it, and how much anxiety she has about her work, and if it's good or if it's not. You know, there is just a lot of she in the catalog we did, we had a show of hers in 2022 or 2022. There's a wonderful poem that's included in that she wrote that is just about that effort to go into the studio every day and tackle this problem again, and how difficult that can be for her. But yet she is also one of the most disciplined people that I know, because she really does. She'll say, I won't be on email for 2 weeks because I'm in my studio from morning to evening. Yeah. And so she'll just attack that work in her studio and then, you know, go back to classes or traveling, whatever. It's really fascinating.
No, she hasn't.
It's not easy, like you would think, with someone who's been working and making quilts for so long, especially.
And I think that was the thing that I've always been aware of, is just her incredible discipline. And just, you can't produce this amount of good work without a lot of work. And in a couple of her books that I have, she's included some of her notebooks, her sketchbooks, as well as her diaries, her daily diaries. And she talks about the anxieties that she has. And, you know, she'll 12 hours a day in the studio, or in the studio 8 o'clock and not stopping until 6 o'clock. And that does take incredible discipline. And
yes, it does.
Every day is not always productive, I think. But when that log jam breaks, I think then you've got to feel good. The other thing I didn't mention, that the early quilts we saw are hand quilted, and she has continued to have her quilts hand quilted. So this is also hand quilted. Every quilt we have seen by her and will see is hand quilted. And she works with several quilters in Ohio. She marks the lines because she really does see that quilting as an added design layer. And it's not just necessarily following the lines that she has created. Sometimes it's a different line or shape than what she has created. And I again find that fascinating, that she still continues to want to have her works hand quilted,
Yeah.
and go to that additional control of, yeah, this is how the quilting is going to enhance my design. And
yeah, there's not very. I wonder who else is still having work hand quilted. I just can't imagine there's really hardly anybody that still does that.
Yeah, and I think some do hand quilt, or I think a lot of artists today are doing some handwork on their quilts.
Handwork,
It's
yeah.
not necessarily quilting. It's more to show the evidence of the hand, send that message, than it is necessarily to add another design layer. But
Yeah.
it still shows evidence of the hand in this work. I love so. And then the next slide, at the same time she was doing this work, she started monoprinting fabrics. And just a brief tutorial with monoprints, you have a plastic, a glass plate, a plate of something. You put paint down on it, you make marks in that plate, and then you lay your fabric on the plate or the plastic. And so you basically, you print the fabric, and mono meaning one, because once you've taken up all of that dye, you have to add more, and you can't do two of the same. And so this, I think, is, talk about improvisational. This is just, but at the same time she was doing that very precise piecing that we saw before. She was also working on the monoprints. And I have to think it came out of her art training, where I'm sure she painted in
I think so, yeah.
And out of the dye process, that, how you can use dyes as paints. And again, I find this fascinating.
Yeah, she said we showed a lot of her monoprints in the latest exhibition, and she wanted them in a particular order because she said she got so much better as she went along, and you really could see how she could control the design. And it's like 3 layers of this, but she has about 5 minutes to do this process. So she and her husband do it, and that's a 40-inch by 79 long piece. They have to lay that down in one piece and then completely carefully lift it so it doesn't smudge. I mean, technically it's so demanding, but as you look, you began to just see, you could start to really see the layers that she was creating. And I think she loves that immediacy of it. And that, like, when she uses her cut, like, she uses a rotary cutter, but she doesn't use it with a ruler, and she uses it away from her body. So she has control over it. And you can see that in the way she creates these lines. That same kind of flow that she does with her rotary cutter is in the way she handles these various, I guess they're like pads almost, these, and she has varying thickness on them, and that helps her get the layers too. It was fascinating to see this process.
What tools does she use?
Pardon me?
Why am I echoing? What tools did she use?
I think it was some sort of a pad. It was not a brush. It was some way of her to pull the dye across the fabric she had placed down. And then, or like maybe it's plastic, like you said, it's a firm surface, and she has about 5 minutes to draw that out with these different. So you can see in the photo, if you look really closely, some of the lines are a little bit more narrow, so she has different widths to work with.
Got it.
It's my understanding. It is really, according to the people that came and have done this kind of monoprinting, which you typically would do on a small printing press, this is ridiculously difficult to achieve. And Nancy just has got it in, she's just like determined to perfect it, whatever that means to her. So we showed, I don't know how many we showed, 40 some of these, where she had just gone in day after day after day and worked on the process.
I think I might have a slide of that later on.
It was crazy.
But while we're talking about her exhibitions, I want to say one thing, and then I want to go to her exhibitions, because IQM has really been wonderful has been pivotal in exhibiting her work. But when I talk about those influences, so one of the things that she also did, along with other quilt artists in Ohio, was founding Quilt National in 1979. And It was to exhibit the most innovative quilts. And at the time, most of the quilt artists working were kind of working in isolation, were not necessarily aware of each other. And this was like the first time they all came together and realized that there are other artists who are working in this medium and doing fascinating, interesting things, innovative things. And, you know, I think Quilt National is still the benchmark after 45 years for contemporary quilt making.
It is. It's a really rigorous judging process to get your, and what, 700 quilts submitted, and they show about 80, I think.
Well, I was honored to jury Quilt National 21, and I think we had over 850 entries.
Wow.
No, I mean, some were 2 or 3 entries by the same artist. You just have one work by each artist, and we chose 84 works, and it was not easy. It was not easy. Let's go to the next slide, because that's one of the early exhibitions from 2008 that IQM did. A little nostalgia there.
Oh my gosh, Nancy, this was so stressful. You know, I had gone out and I picked out the pieces. I had met with Nancy, and it was an experience. I mean, she is very intense. We'd be having a kind of a conversation about, you know, family, and it'd be very light and lovely. And she's got a great, I mean, you just love Nancy. And then all of a sudden she would stop and she'd say, "What do you think about this artist?" And you'd be like, I don't know. Anyway, so she's very intense. And I was very, very stressed because she said, you know, when I arrive in Lincoln, she was coming in to do an opening lecture. She said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the museum. And if I don't like the quilts are hung, we're rehanging them. And I was like, okay, Nancy. Because she is so passionate about her work and so committed to her work that if it doesn't look good, she's not going to be happy with it. So, you know, they were supposed to let me know the minute she stepped out of her car. They didn't get a hold of me. She was already in the gallery when I walked in, and I was like, "Oh, what do you think?" She was crying. She was like, "It looks great. I love it." And we had actually not at years later, she talked to me a lot about something you'll hear when you're at class with Nancy, and that is this idea of visual tension. And she talked about visual tension in a gallery show, and how the way you hang things is so she was so aware of all this. So to have her come in and say we had done a good job was an incredible relief. That's what I remember about that exhibition most. But we had a great, we've always had a really strong exhibition team, and they are, I'm so proud of the exhibitions we do. And so that was a challenge. Yeah.
Well, there is an art to laying out exhibitions.
There
is. You can't just slap things on the wall. We know that. And let's take one more look at this, another slide of this exhibition.
That design wall. Yeah. That was super fun for me. I was in Nancy's studio and looking at all this, basically a wall. This was kind of the wall that was up, obviously not exactly how, but we were talking about in our opening, we were talking about quilts in common. So the fact that we were aware of quilts all over the globe in all kinds of different ways. We had this big exhibition and we had pulled in artwork from all of the different museums on campus. So we had glasswork and baskets and paintings and film and books, trying to make the point that, you know, quilts share elements of art just like any other kind of art. And what we loved about Nancy is that she had drawn her inspiration from so many other types of art. So this design wall, it was her inspiration, and it had been up for a long time. And I said, do you mind if I take pictures? I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do this, but I'd love to use these. And I finally said, would you ever consider letting me take down the design wall and move it to Lincoln? And she said, well, she had to think about it, and she said, you know, it's been up a long time. I want to change it. So yes, you can take it down. So I photographed everything and took every bit of it down. And you guys, when she was watching me take it down, at a certain point, she just said, I'm not going to watch. And she just walked away because it was just stressful for her to see that. But so to recreate that and to be able to really show what Nancy was looking at every day and what was inspiring her was really cool. Really fun.
Well, it's quite an impact. It's really great.
I loved that design wall so much.
And then you had another exhibition in 2021. Look at the next slide. Here's some of her monoprints.
That was a really amazing show.
Was it 20? No, it was.
Yeah, 21.
It
Oh,
was
it's probably
2010.
21. And
Sorry, it's 2010. Not it's 2020. Sorry, typo.
yeah, there we go.
2020.
Yeah. We did not have them up for 11 years. No, that show was really incredible because
yeah, okay.
we actually used the poem that I was telling you about from Nancy's book. We actually had it on the floor as you walked into the gallery, so you could read it as you entered this long bridge, is what we call it in the museum. And that's what was so intriguing about so much of this work. She was very vulnerable and open about this anxiety. And I think it's because she was in the midst of exploring a whole new technique that she wasn't sure about. And so for her to go back and try again was really a challenge.
We have a wonderful behind the scenes Elf. And Elf, if you could change that to August 2020 to March 2021, that would be correct. Thank you very much, Elf.
Yeah, our elf named Tara behind the scenes.
That's amazing. Thank you. I love to have support behind the scenes. Thank you very much. Yes, we want to get that right for the recording. And as you can see, I mean, these works are enormous, and that you described her process of doing these monoprints.
Yeah, and I know you might have a couple more photos, but for anybody who wants to, we do have, at this time, we would have our Matterport virtual walkthrough. So you can actually walk down the bridge and you can go into the exhibition virtually and zoom in on the work and on the labels. So if you wanted to explore more, all of our exhibitions we've had are on the site, but probably only the last 4 or 5 years, we've used this virtual program.
And the earlier exhibition from 2008, that is not on the Matterport, but my images are downloaded from the IQM website, and they're good images, still images. And anyone not familiar with Matterport, it's this incredible 3D camera, and it's not just like your cell phone. You need to figure out how to use it, but you can zoom in on the labels. You can just stand in the gallery and turn on the Matterport and look around. It's really pretty spectacular.
Yeah. It's a great program. I really love it.
And I think we have one more slide of this exhibition. Yeah.
Yeah, so we did a combination of her new monoprints and some of her other work as well.
Yeah.
And I just, her work is just fascinating. And I love that when you can see them in a series where you can really see her kind of working through things.
Well, and as I said, earlier, I'm intrigued. I said it earlier that I'm intrigued by not only her body of work and the influence that she's had on quilt artists through her work, but through her teaching, especially in the last 2 decades. And I talked to a couple of her students who said, it's really like getting an MFA in 2 weeks. It's a crash course in art, and it's rigorous but hugely satisfying. And IQM, I understand, is going to have an exhibition coming up of her students. So tell us a little bit about color compositions. And I think we have a slide of it now in Germany. The next slide.
Yeah, this exhibition is currently up in Germany, and as soon as this is the first show, then they did another museum show, and then it will come to the States, and the IQM will have it opening on March 7th. And March 7th is our first Friday, so Nancy will be in Lincoln and be talking about this work. So she was the curator of this show, and it's her students' work. They all used an 80 by 80 format for their quilts. So they're all close to the same size and enormous. And I love that Nancy sometimes pushes students to work large scale like that, because I have to admit, I just think a quilt can have such a larger impact, a greater impact when you see that full size. So I love it when artists challenge themselves to work in that full size. So we're really excited to see that. And then we're hoping to travel that around. So if anybody has a local museum, they think maybe San Jose, we're talking to them too. So we're looking for sites for that show to travel. The work is phenomenal though. And I took one, Nancy really thought it would be a great learning experience for a curator to come and do a class. So I couldn't do a 2-week class, but I did go and do 1 week with Nancy. And I am not a quilt maker. I sew, I do work with my hands regularly, but it was, I tell you, my brain was just tired when that week was up. I was physically tired because you were sewing 12 hours a day because you had assignments you wanted to keep up with. And Nancy, I think, pushes it hard like that because she wants you to get out of your head and not be thinking. Just let it kind of flow, let it happen. Let yourself have that freedom to see what happens. But it was a challenge, and lots of different steps in each assignment. And I was in a beginning class, so it was crazy. But it also is, when you work with Nancy, you just realize that she is just so committed and so passionate about what she feels is good art. And she feels like it's not like you're going to be there the first time you try, but she's going to help you, and she's going to help you take the steps to free yourself up a little bit. And then oftentimes you'll work with, you'll choose a basic design and you'll kind of manipulate that one design. And that helped a lot because you could focus. But it was so satisfying, and it was so inspiring. And when you see someone who's that passionate about what they do, I don't know, I just admire it so much. And to me, that in my experience at the museum and having met artists and gone to artist studios, that's what kind of makes them different than a lot of we hobbyists who love to do handwork. These artists seem to have something in their psyche or their brain, whatever, that is driving them to create. And I don't have that drive. I don't feel that need to, like we said earlier, like to solve something, where these artists really seem to. So,
well, you encouraged me to do the same. So in May of 2025, I'm taking 2 weeks with her. So I'm a little nervous. But when I saw the slides, the images of this Color Improvisations 3, I'm going to backtrack because as I've juried a couple of major exhibitions the last few years, Quilt National, as I mentioned, also Visions, and Fiber Art Now, Excellence in Quilts. And I would say that there are probably 30% of the entries are her students. And you can't always tell. Sometimes they haven't yet found their own voice, but they still have a strong voice. But as I look at these images on our screen now, I mean, these are 5 very different design aesthetics, and all her students. And did you tell me there are 38 students and 44 works in the show?
I think so. Yeah, it's a big show. It's a lot of work, and there's a beautiful catalog that goes with it. It's really outstanding. I really can't wait to see the work.
But I mean, 38 is amazing that there are 38 strong students. Again, I think that's a testimonial to not only the artist doing the work, but to Nancy's encouragement and support, and as I said, training, like getting your MFA.
Yeah. She demands excellence too. I mean, I watched her with students who were kind of floundering, didn't know quite what they were doing, trying to start something. And she came up and she said, no, that's muddy. You need to step back. You need to start over. And sometimes it was hard for people to hear that. And Nancy knows she has a reputation. She's like, she always starts out, I'm not trying to make anybody cry. I'm just going to say that. That's not my point though. But you do, it is such a mental thing. It is physically demanding to be sewing like that. But the mental challenge that you're putting yourself through, and that I just assume that must be what it's like for Nancy every day when she's working, is she's got that challenge going on in her head. And so that is mentally and physically exhausting. The mental part of it just is wearing on you. So
I think that's just a lot of,
but it's an inspiring thing. I mean, I didn't leave there feeling like tired, I was like, I can't wait to go home and play with my fabric more. I want to keep trying this. I want to keep learning this way, because it's like your mind's been opened up to something new. So it was a great feeling, but it was intense.
I think self-critique is a hard thing for artists of all media. So I don't know that we have any questions. Are we kind of coming to the end of our time here?
I haven't seen questions yet, but let me see if we've got any in the comments. No.
Okay.
Have you got a few more slides for us, Nancy? Or?
I don't.
Okay.
but we can just I have a few more things I want to point out. I want to remind everybody that this is sponsored by the International Quilt Museum and American Quilt Study Group. I am the president of American Quilt Study Group, and it's just a couple of announcements. Some are timely, some are not. We will be 45 years old next year. One of the things we do is we have a peer-reviewed journal that publishes articles about quilt-related research. And in the past, it's really kind of only been available to university, on university websites and whatnot, and if you had a copy of it. But I'm pleased to announce that University of Nebraska is now hosting us on their digital commons, and all of the uncoverings have been digitized in color with images, word searchable. And you will soon be able to find them on the Quilt Index as well, on Michigan State University program. And actually, as we are searching them more and more, if you just go to Google and you want to find out more about Nancy Crow or more, well, there's not an article about her yet in Uncoverings, but if you want to find out about other topics you might be interested in quilt-related research, you can do that by word searchable Uncoverings. So thank you, little elf back there. I'm very excited.
That is an amazing resource. And, when we have students working with us and they say, I'm interested in this topic or this, I say the first thing you need to do is you need to go to Uncoverings, because you've got peer-reviewed journals that are journal articles that are so solid. You've got the bibliographies. That's the place where you need to start. So I'm using the digital sources. I've got a whole copy of AQSG in my office. It's an invaluable research tool, and so much of what we do is built on those previous articles. It's really been the base for quilt research.
And I'm really proud that we've gotten this done in the last year with some generous support. And it's now available to everybody. It was an incredible resource that was really not available. So unl.edu/digital commons, and you'll find there are a whole bunch of publications, and blanket and Uncoverings will be there. Also, one of the things we do is an in-person seminar, which will be in Portland, Maine in October. You can find out about that on our website. But we also have a virtual seminar coming up January 31st, February 1st, and 2nd of 2025. And we haven't yet posted the talks, but they're going to be a great range of subjects of all genres, all periods. And we will have a booth at QuiltCon in February 20th through the 22nd in Phoenix. So come look for us there if you happen to watch this before then.
Well, there's so much going on, and I am so thrilled that AQSG is showing just some amazing growth under your leadership, Nancy, and it's been really wonderful. A lot of increase in memberships and younger people coming in and finding, this great source. So that's been really terrific. And QuiltCon's going to be a wonderful place for AQSG.
I think so. And, it's also, we have a fabulously talented 2 full-time staff people in our bricks and mortar office in Lincoln. But we also have an incredibly talented core of volunteers who make programs like this happen. And if our little elf could go to the next slide. I just wanted to say thank you, Carolyn, for your almost 4 years of Quiltside chats. We couldn't have done it without you.
Oh my gosh, 4 years? I thought it was about a year.
No, it was early 21. One of the good parts of the pandemic. And I just thank you for all your time and talent that you have given everybody. And as I watch some of the other Quiltside chats, I mean, what an amazing resource that we have. And so we deeply appreciate your time and all you've done. And there's a little something in the mail for you that we hope you'll have the time when you retire next year to enjoy a little pampering. So
Oh, I thank you so much. This has just been such fun. This is the kind of thing that, you know, those of us, especially AQSG members, understand this. Those of us that love quilts, we could do this all day, every day. So to just sit and talk quilts has just been a blast, and I've really enjoyed it. And I'm not technically going away. I'm retiring from my position, but I'm still going to be at the museum in a research position. And if I get my initial research project, which is the history of the museum, talking to people who helped found the museum, things like that, if I get that done, maybe I have another AQSG article. You never know.
Okay. Well, I do want people to know that maybe you'll be with us in 2025. But in addition to IQM, we will also be having Quiltside chats with the Virginia Quilt Museum and the New England Quilt Museum. So, you know, take a look and think about something you might want to steal from one of those museums, if it weren't illegal, for 2025.
And, you know, it doesn't have to be, I always really encourage people too, to just think about like pulling out some of those quilts and talking about them. It doesn't have to be a research project that you're interested in. There's just a lot of ways that you can talk about quilts of an era and just show some great examples too. So don't be shy.
There are a lot of them out there. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. And thanks for being here today. And I cannot believe it is December 15th. That is kind of mind-boggling to me. But so look for more Quiltside chats in 2025.
Yeah. And thank you again, Carolyn. And I'll see you soon, I hope.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye now.